Hi everyone. I wasn't sure whether I was going to talk about this controversy because it sounded to me that it was an issue mostly between John Davidson, the man with Tourette's, on one side, and the actors Michael B. Jordan and Daryl Lindo on the other. And if they could resolve their supposed differences, then we did not need to get involved. However, the controversy has ballooned to a stratospheric level online, and the behaviors and comments I have observed compel me to join the conversation. So here we go. Let's not forget that this is the second transnational controversy involving racism during the US Black History Month, after President Trump posted a video depicting Barack Obama and Michelle Obama's apes earlier this month, which reflects poorly on the supposed progress we are all called to make in advancing peace and defeating racism, not just during Black History Month, but all year round in every sphere of our lives. So I want to start with the facts first. During the BAFTA ceremony on Sunday, the 22nd of February, while actors Michael B. Jordan and Daryl Lindo were on stage, a man named John Davidson, who has Tourette Syndrome, shouted the N-word. Tourette Syndrome is a neurological condition characterized by involuntary tics, and these tics can be movements or they can be vocal. One important thing to remember is that the tics are involuntary. This is very important for our discussion. In rare cases, individuals may experience something called coprolalia, which involves involuntary utterance of socially inappropriate or taboo words. And these are all things that I have just learned over the past week because of this controversy. The host of the BAFTAs was actor Alan Cummings, who I understand on top of the ceremony warned the audience of the presence of John Davidson, who has Tourette syndrome and may utter inappropriate words at times due to his condition. We should also remind that Michael B. Jordan and Daryl Lindo are on stage to give an award and have been honored over the past few weeks for their brilliant work in the competing films Sinners. Now, in the face of this unfortunate moment, if the BAFTA organization knew that John Davidson had the propensity for uncontrollable inappropriate outbursts due to his Tourette syndrome, well, he has asked why a microphone was placed next to him. And this is a very important question. I think we are all waiting to hear from the BAFTA organization about this. The second question is to the BBC. Because of this scandal, we are now aware that John Davidson did not only say a racist slur, he also uttered a homophobic slur, which was removed prior to broadcasting the event on television. What this means is that there was a team who consciously cared about checking whether there was anything inappropriate or offensive said during the BAFTA ceremony, and consciously selected to remove some segments and not others so that it is suitable for large public viewing. Yet they did not remove the N-word from the final version. Not only this, but we are also aware that the BBC removed from its BAFTA coverage a section of the acceptance speech from winning filmmaker Akinola Davis Jr., which included a tribute to people facing wars and persecution and included the words "Free Palestine" in particular. Those words were removed, all the while keeping the racial slur in their final broadcast version of the ceremony. From my perspective, this is a blatant case of double standards and at the very least of negligence. And 7 days later, we are still waiting to hear from the BBC organization on why this selective editing was executed and allowed. For me, this is where the controversy lies and where the focus should be ultimately. However, unfortunately, this scandal has led us to start a verbal warfare online about the nature of racism. We now know that John Davidson's behavior was involuntary, which has led people to conclude that there wasn't any racism taking place, and therefore the outrage, especially from Black people who have heard the N-word during the broadcast, who have heard about the controversy, is not warranted. Concluding that this outrage is not warranted is quite reductive, in my opinion. A harm was done, whether voluntarily or involuntarily. People who are at the receiving end of the harm are not necessarily aware of whether this was voluntary or not at the moment the harm is done. Also, the N-word does not become neutral simply because the speaker did not choose it consciously. There is ample historical and contemporary evidence today explaining that racism does not need intent to exist. Many people are racist without actually knowing they are, and it is the responsibility of everyone to bring that awareness to as many people as possible. However, in the situation we are dealing with now, this does not apply to John Davidson. And what I mean, in case it is not clear, is that John Davidson is not racist. After investigation and after learning about Tourette's, it is evident that while Davidson's outburst was racist, his intent is absolutely not. Having said that, a racist outburst blurted out to two black men does not come out of nothing, and at the very least proves that the intent to harm and the social discomfort, i.e. the taboo around people of color, still exists. And we know that already. Racism exists. For most people, this is nothing new. But if some people were still motivated to argue that racism does not exist, and unfortunately those people exist, I'm hoping that this brings evidence today that their argument is void. At the very least, we are learning that Tourette's is the very vehicle testifying of the existence of those taboos and social clashes in society. However, I will repeat again, because this is very important, my opinion is that John Davidson is not racist. John Davidson has Tourette Syndrome. Now, going back to the nature of racism, what I want to ask now is, in the face of all this controversy, who gets to define racism? Does the definition belong exclusively to the victim, the person at the receiving end of the racist slur, or can the dominant group, the perpetrator, participate in defining racism as well? It seems to me that this is important to ask, especially when there is a tendency not to agree on when racism exists and when it doesn't, as has been the case in this BAFTA situation. Here, from my perspective, it is obvious that people from all groups should be able to contribute to the understanding of racism so that people from neither group ever become racist. Yet when we want to operate with a collective approach to learning, the issue lies where people start to erase the lived experience of certain groups. If on one side we define racism purely by intent, we erase impact. But if on the other side we define racism purely by impact, we risk ignoring neurological realities like Tourette syndrome. From my perspective, this is a huge step up for Black people to accept that racism can be perpetrated without the perpetrator being racist. I personally think this is something new. I have never heard of that before, and given the historical violence of the N-word, given the pain it carries, given the centuries-long harm and the ongoing struggle of Black people, we have to be tolerant of their instinctive refusal to give anyone a pass using the N-word unless there has been full, total collective investigation. The online reaction to this situation has been ferocious and has unfortunately given shape to very entrenched groups. Some rushed to defend John Davidson aggressively, dismissing any expression of hurt as oversensitivity on the part of Black people. Others rushed to condemn him absolutely without pausing to understand Tourette syndrome. And what is observable and frankly tragic is that only a minority of Black voices appear willing to defend John Davidson publicly, and only a minority of white voices appear willing to defend the experience of Michael B. Jordan, Daryl Lindo, and the wider Black community. Communities have retreated into their trenches. It has become us versus them, ableism versus racism, disability rights versus racial dignity, as if one community must lose for the other to win, which is the very logic of polarization which should be avoided. And for some reason, social media amplifies it to exponential levels. People online, probably due to not being immediately identifiable or reachable physically, have rushed to insults. There is an ambient, recurring, irresistible need to demean anyone who asks a basic question like, what exactly is Tourette syndrome? Before someone can even finish asking the questions or provide context for their question, they are branded ignorant, ableist, or uneducated. People are told to go watch the film before daring to speak, not spending the 2 hours necessary to watch the film I Swear, which chronicles the life of John Davidson, has become now evidence of intolerance to disability. Something that many people forget is that we're all learning here. On one side, not everyone understands neurological disorders. Not everyone understands the neurological mechanics of coprolalia, which is the form of Tourette's that John Davidson has, as I said earlier, which makes him say socially inappropriate comments uncontrollably. On the other side, it is manifest that not everyone understands the historical trauma attached to racial slurs. I'm biased here, but in my view, racism is a concept that is more available for learning than Tourette's. Therefore, I will have less tolerance for people who display blatant ignorance about the suffering from racism than people displaying ignorance about the Tourette Syndrome, which we are only beginning to learn. Nonetheless, public controversy should be an opportunity for education on either side, and that is if we want to draw sides, because we don't have to. But instead, it has become a battleground of moral superiority. Social networks, literally named for connection, literally named for engaging in social conversations, have become arenas of humiliation. We are witnessing the collision of two pains that are both legitimate. On one side, the pain of disability stigma, the exhaustion of constantly having to explain neurological conditions, and on the other side, the persistent intergenerational trauma of racial dehumanization, that deep frustration of allowing language that has historically signaled violence. Both pains are real, but why do they have to compete? Why the rush to judge? Why the desire to insult, to demean? Why the compulsive need to feel morally superior? From a Peace Compass perspective, this is the most urgent issue, because the real conflict is not between John Davidson and Michael B. Jordan and Daryl Lindo. It's clear to me that if it was up to them, they would have resolved and folded this unfortunate situation. The real conflict seems to be between unprocessed pain on both sides of the argument, and therefore the compulsive need to exploit any opportunity to project that pain. We see left and right being weaponized. The words woke, MAGA, liberals are used as insults online, not only to affirm your position, but even to set the parameter of combat. And from my perspective, this is really worrying. Before anyone asks what happened, what do we know? Which is the basic research, the basic innocent engagement into a conversation, people have already sunk into the most vicious culture war. Why do we first scan for political affiliation before engaging in human conversation? Why do political affiliations have to be relevant when you ask, hello, how are you? Why do political affiliations have to be relevant when you say, I agree or I disagree? This will always happen regardless of which side of the political spectrum you position yourself. So why do political affiliations have to determine at the onset whether someone can be a friend or not, and even whether someone is allowed to speak with you or not? Why the need to threaten an identity even before knowing who the person is? What have we become to have allowed such polarization, such primitive social schism? The N-word was heard publicly on one of the largest television channels in the world. And in that instant, we have to allow Black viewers to feel. And what they feel will be shock, embarrassment, hurt, a tightening in the chest. And those physiological responses are not political positions. They are responses of the nervous system. In a similar way, because of the BBC's blunder, people with Tourette syndrome will feel fear now, fear of public shaming, fear of being misunderstood, fear of stigma. And so that means that both communities are vulnerable here. So what do we do in the face of this? My view is that individual personal responsibility is where we have to go back to. The necessary self-care that requires introspection and what I call self-scanning. When we feel the urge to judge, ask ourselves, what is triggered in me right now? What pain is being touched? Why does this feel personal? When we feel the urge to insult, why do I need to demean someone else? What fear in me is surfacing? What identity in me do I feel is threatened? Because as I said in a previous video on racism 2 weeks ago, any attack is a cry for help. When you feel the urge to declare one side pure and the other evil, it's important to pause. Because real life is rarely that simple and it requires much more nuance than that. Two seemingly opposite truths can occupy the same space. That means we can say Tourette syndrome deserves understanding, racial trauma deserves respect, institutions must manage risk, impact matters even when intent is absent. The capacity to hold all these truths simultaneously determines our level of maturity, our ability to create the conditions for peace, and ultimately our ability to make enduring social progress. The most revealing part of this controversy is not the word that was uttered, it is the speed with which we turned on each other, the speed with which we labeled, the speed with which we fought. We cannot build a peaceful society if every trigger becomes ammunition. And I will go even as far as saying that if every trigger causes us to go to war, it is the very manifestation of a weak society. Many have shown that they are not seeking understanding, instead they are seeking release. But when we use public controversy as a release valve for private anger, all we do is escalate division. Peace requires something harder. It requires self-inquiry. It requires the courage to say, this is complicated, let's slow down. And this should not be deemed a weakness or a move for partisanship. This is calling for moderation, for investigation before jumping to conclusion too hastily. It is our collective duty of care in order to prevent society from tearing itself apart. So that's what I had to say on the topic. Thanks for following me throughout this reflection. Please tell us what you think in the comments. Also, please continue to support by liking and subscribing. This will help us further expand our message of connection and our message of peace. Thank you very much. See you in the next video. Bye-bye.